Every night was the same torture. Drink your milk, ungrateful girl. The taste was horrible. The smell revolted my stomach. When I vomited, he would lock me in the dark basement. For years, I swallowed not only that awful liquid, but also the terror that no one saw. Hello there, my dear friends. What a blessing to be able to talk with you today. I'm Martha Williams, 75 years old, born and raised here in Boston, Massachusetts, where I still live today. The sounds of the big city have become part of me. You know, it's like a familiar soundtrack that's accompanied my life for so many decades. These days, my greatest pleasure is tending to my small vertical garden on my apartment balcony. I have orchids, ferns, and even some herbs I use in cooking. You should see how happy I get when a new flower appears. It's a joy that only people who care for plants truly understand. I started this garden after my husband passed away about 8 years ago. At first, it was just to occupy my time, but it turned into a passion that's brought me so much peace. I'm sitting in my favorite armchair now next to the window that overlooks the avenue. I have a small table beside me with a cup of lemon balm tea that I planted and harvested myself. My cat, Whiskers, is sleeping on the rug as usual. It's in this little corner that I spend many afternoons. Sometimes reading, sometimes just observing life outside. And you, my dear viewers, tell me in the comments from which corner of America are you watching me, early morning with your breakfast, during lunch, or perhaps late afternoon when the sun is setting. I'm so happy to know where my virtual grandchildren are watching from, and at what time of day you take a moment to listen to the stories of this old lady. Let me know, okay? I'd love to read each comment. You know, today I wanted to talk with you about something I've kept hidden for many years. A difficult story, but one that taught me about strength, and about how we can find ways to free ourselves. Even when it seems impossible, we don't always get to face life's monsters with an army by our side. Sometimes we need to use our intelligence and courage to create our own justice. It all began when I was little during visits to my grandparents' house far from Boston. It was a place where what happened inside the walls stayed hidden from the world's eyes, where a nightly ritual turned my childhood into a nightmare that seemed endless. In my childhood here in Boston, I lived in a small apartment in Dorchester with my parents. My father, Gerald, worked as an accountant in a large downtown office, leaving early and returning late, always with his leather briefcase under his arm. Mom, Dorothy, was a seamstress who worked from home. She had a Singer sewing machine that made a soft humming sound that filled my afternoons. She was a sweet woman with an easy smile and always busy hands. Our life was simple but good. I studied at the neighborhood public school, played with the kids from the building, and loved to draw. At that time, Boston was already a big, noisy city, but our little corner was full of affection. On weekends we liked to go to Boston Common, where I could run and play while my parents talked, sitting on the benches. However, during school breaks and some weekends, something happened that completely changed my world. I traveled to stay with my paternal grandparents in Millfield, a small town in rural Vermont. It was a long bus trip that my parents thought was important for me to know my roots, as my father would say. My grandparents' house was away from town, almost like a small farm. It was an old wooden construction with a large yard full of fruit trees, and a vegetable garden that my grandmother Irene tended with care. My grandfather Arnold was considered a respected man in the community, a farmer, owner of some land, always well dressed when he went to church on Sundays. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect setting for a happy childhood. Fresh air, space to play, fresh fruit to pick. My parents believed these times in the countryside would be great for me, a girl from the big city. The routine there was very different from Boston. We woke up with the Ruers' crow, had coffee with fresh milk drawn that morning, homemade bread and jam made by Grandma Irene. During the day, I helped my grandmother with small tasks, feeding the chickens, picking vegetables from the garden, hanging clothes on the line. She was a quiet woman of few words, always attentive to the clock and my grandfather's footsteps. Grandma Irene had a strange way about her, looking around before saying anything as if afraid of being heard. Her hands were rough and trembling, marked by heavy work. When we were alone, sometimes she would hum old Vermont folk songs softly, but would immediately fall silent upon hearing Grandpa Arnold's heavy footsteps approaching. My grandfather was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray hair, always neatly conned, and a thick mustache that he frequently smoothed. His gaze was severe, and he rarely smiled. When he spoke, everyone fell silent to listen. No one dared disagree with him, not even neighbors, who sometimes came for coffee or to ask for a favor. At the table, Grandpa Arnold always sat at the head. He served himself first, and only afterward could others serve themselves. He had a special glass thick with blue details that only he could use. If anyone picked it up by mistake, he would slam the table and say, "This isn't for just anyone's mouth." During the day, I tried to stay as far away from him as possible, playing alone in the orchard or helping Grandma Irene in the kitchen. There was a neighbor girl, Celeste, daughter of the caretaker from the next farm, with whom I sometimes played. She was my age, with curly hair and freckles on her face. Together we made rag dolls, played house under the trees, or went to the stream that cut through the properties. But even during play, I lived with a tightness in my chest, because I knew that night would come, and with it the ritual I so feared. When the sun began to set, my heart would race. Grandma Irene became even more silent, moving in the kitchen like a ghost, preparing dinner without making noise. Everything changed when night fell in Millfield. The starry sky that should have been beautiful only brought me fear. The smell of food that should have opened my appetite gave me anticipatory nausea. The crickets and frogs singing outside instead of lulling me into peaceful sleep sounded like a countdown to terror. It was on one of these nights when I was 8 years old that I realized something was very wrong in that house. It wasn't just my grandfather's authoritarianism. It was something deeper and darker that hung over those wooden walls. I saw my grandmother Irene hiding a medicine bottle when my grandfather entered the kitchen, and the look he gave her made my blood freeze. That's when I understood that she also lived in a constant state of alert, just like me. "Martha, come here," he would say every night after dinner when the dishes were already washed and put away. His voice, deep and authoritative, made my knees weaken. "It's time for your nighttime medicine to grow strong and healthy." And so began the ritual that transformed my childhood into a nightmare. A secret I kept for so long it almost fused with my bones. It was in the summer, when I turned 9, that the nighttime medicine ritual became even more terrifying. I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents took me to Millfield to spend an entire month of school vacation. "It will do you good to breathe fresh air, dear," my mother said, not imagining what happened in that house when the sun went down. On the first night after dinner, Grandpa Arnold called me to the kitchen as he always did. Grandma Irene was finishing washing the dishes with that distant look I knew so well. Her hands trembled more than usual. "Sit there, girl," ordered Grandpa, pointing to the wooden chair against the kitchen wall. It was a chair taller than the others, made especially for me to reach the table. "It's time for your medicine." I sat down, feeling the cold of the wood against my legs. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. Grandpa Arnold opened the tall cabinet, the one with the key, and took out a brown bottle. It was dark glass. You couldn't see what was inside. He always said it was medicine to grow strong. But the smell, oh, the smell wasn't like any medicine I knew. He took his glass, the one nobody else could use, and poured a wettish liquid. It looked like milk, but it wasn't just that. There was something mixed in that made the liquid thicker with a strong odor that made me nauseous just smelling it. "Drink it all," he said, placing the glass in front of me, to the last drop. Grandma Irene left the kitchen at that moment as she always did. She never stayed to watch. Years later I understood that she couldn't bear to witness it, but also didn't have the courage to defend me. That night was different because I was older and tried to resist. "I don't want a grandpa. It smells bad." His face transformed instantly. His thick eyebrows joined and his mustache trembled with anger. He hit the table so hard the glass almost tipped over. "I'm not asking if you want to. I'm ordering you to drink. Do you know how many children out there would want to have a grandfather who takes care of them? An ungrateful child. That's what you are." With trembling hands I took the glass. The liquid had small lumps, as if something had been carelessly dissolved in it. The taste was even worse than the smell. Bitter and with a texture that stuck to your tongue. Each sip was torture. My whole body rejected it. Halfway through the glass, I felt my stomach turn. I tried to hold it, but I couldn't. I vomited right there on the kitchen table, soiling the tablecloth that Grandma Irene had embroidered. What happened next was etched in my memory as if carved with a knife. Grandpa Arnold stood up, his face red with fury. He grabbed my arm with such force that it left bruises in the following days. He dragged me out of the kitchen across the dark hallway until we reached the door that led to the basement. "Ungrateful children need to learn," he said, opening the door. "You'll think about what you did." The basement was dark and damp, full of old boxes and rusty tools. It had a musty smell that mixed with the odor of earth. There was no electric light down there, just a tiny window near the ceiling that barely let in any light. He pushed me down the stairs and closed the door. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. I stayed there alone in the dark, crying softly so he wouldn't hear me and get even angrier. I don't know how much time passed until the door opened again. I was huddled in a corner shivering from cold and fear when I saw the figure of my grandmother Irene, carefully descending the stairs to avoid making noise. "Come, my little granddaughter," she whispered, extending her hand. "He's already gone to sleep. Let's take you to your room without making noise." She hugged me tightly, something rare for her, who was always so restrained. I felt her tears wet my hair. "Forgive me," she repeated softly. "Forgive me for not being able to defend you." That night, lying in the guest room bed, I heard a muffled argument coming from my grandparents' room. The voice of Grandma Irene, normally so submissive, seemed to have found some courage. "She's just a child, Arnold. Why do you do this to her?" I couldn't hear his response, only the sound of something breaking, and then the heavy silence that took over the house. The next morning, Grandma Irene appeared with a bruise on her face that she tried to hide with her hair. Nobody commented on it. Breakfast proceeded in absolute silence, only the clinking of silverware against plates. It was on that day that I began to observe more carefully the cabinet where Grandpa kept the medicine. Always locked with a key, which he carried in a bunch along with the pickup truck keys. During the day, when he went out to take care of business in town, I tried to open the cabinet with a hairpin I found in the room like I had seen in a movie. I couldn't. The following week, the ritual continued every night. Sometimes I managed to drink it all without vomiting, and on those days I could go straight to bed. But most of the time my body rejected that strange liquid, and the punishment was always the same hours in the dark basement. It was on one of those nights alone in the basement that I found something interesting among the old boxes. It was an old diary with a leather cover already worn. It belonged to my Aunt Leonora, my father's younger sister, who had lived with my grandparents until she got married and moved to Portland, Maine. Leafing through the pages in the dim light that entered through the little window, I found passages that spoke of night terrors and bitter medicines. I then realized that I wasn't the first to go through that torment. Gradually, I pieced things together. In subsequent visits, I paid more attention to adult conversations. I heard comments about how Aunt Leonora had nervous problems and how she had cut ties with the family after her marriage. I never met her in person, only through photos. In one of these conversations, I heard my grandmother mentioning the home remedies that Grandpa Arnold prepared. He learned it from his father. She told a neighbor who had come to visit. "He says it cures any illness." The neighbor nodded with respect as if it were great wisdom, not noticing the empty look in my grandmother's eyes as she spoke. When I was almost 11, something happened that changed the dynamic of those visits. During a Sunday dinner, when some relatives were gathered, Grandpa Arnold proudly announced that I would spend the entire next summer with them, not just a month. "The girl needs to learn country values. It's not all about the big city," he declared, looking at my father, who agreed without questioning. "My father is already old. He wants to spend time with his granddaughter." That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea of spending 3 entire months in that house, with that nightly ritual, made my stomach turn. That's when I realized I needed to do something. I couldn't simply accept that fate. The next morning, I asked Grandma Irene to teach me how to make the cornbread she always prepared on Sundays. While we mixed the ingredients, I found the courage to ask, "Grandma, why does Grandpa make me drink that medicine every night?" She stopped stirring the dough, looking nervously at the kitchen door, as if fearing he might appear at any moment. "It's for your own good," she whispered, not looking me in the eyes. He thinks it will make you stronger." "But what's in the medicine, Grandma? Why does it taste so bad?" Her hands began to tremble more strongly. "They're herbs, my child. Herbs that he collects and prepares himself." After a pause, she added, "He gave it to your Aunt Leonora, too, from when she was little, and to your father when he was a boy." It was the first confirmation I had that this wasn't normal. Wasn't just an innocent countryside custom. If my father and my aunt had also gone through this, why had no one ever said anything? Why did my father send me there knowing what happened? Later, I discovered that my father rarely spoke of his own childhood. When he mentioned his time in Millfield, it was always about school, friends, never about life at home, as if there were a silent agreement, never to touch on the subject. It was during this visit that I began to plan. If no one was going to protect me, I needed to protect myself. I couldn't confront my grandfather directly. He was big, strong, and feared by everyone. I needed to be smarter. I needed to find a way to end that ritual without him knowing it was me. In the kitchen pantry where Grandma Irene kept the supplies, I saw a bottle of medicine she took for intestinal problems, as she said. It was a strong laxative, fast-acting. I saw how she carefully hid it behind the flower jars, away from Grandpa Arnold's vigilant eyes. It was there, at 11 years old, that the seed of my revenge began to germinate. The months that followed were the longest of my life. I returned to Boston with my parents, carrying that heavy secret and the fear of the next summer. At school, my grades began to drop. I couldn't concentrate, and the teacher sent notes to my mother, concerned about my behavior. "What's happening, dear?" Mom asked one night, sitting on the edge of my bed. "You've been so quiet. You don't play with your friends anymore." I tried to tell her. I swear I tried. I opened my mouth several times, but the words simply wouldn't come out. How to explain that strange ritual? How to say that her husband's father, the grandfather everyone respected so much, locked me in a dark basement? And what if they didn't believe me? "I don't want to go to Grandpa's house for vacation," was all I managed to say with a choked voice. Mom smiled, stroking my hair. "Nonsense, Martha. Your grandfather likes you so much, and you know how happy your father gets when you spend time with his parents." I realized it was no use. It was as if there was an invisible wall between the world of adults and that of children. A wall made of family tradition, respect for elders, and secrets that everyone pretended not to see. At school, Miss Lucille, the science teacher, noticed my change. One afternoon after class, she called me to talk. She was a young woman with curly hair and kind eyes, different from the other more rigid teachers. "Is something bothering you, Martha? You can tell me?" I almost spoke. Her eyes were so sincere, so welcoming. But then I remembered the consequences. What if she told my parents? What if my grandfather found out I had spoken? He always said, "What happens in our house stays in our house." "It's just tiredness, teacher. I've been sleeping badly." She didn't insist, but handed me a little notebook with a colorful cover. "Sometimes when we can't speak, we can write. Nobody needs to read it. It's just to get the thoughts out." That little notebook became my refuge. I wrote everything in it. The bitter taste of the medicine, the smell of the basement, the fear I felt when the sun began to set in Millfield. I hid it under the mattress, and rereading those pages gave me certainty that I wasn't imagining things. When June came, my father announced that he would take me to my grandparents' house at the beginning of December, as soon as school ended. It would be 3 entire months in Millfield, 90 days, 90 nights. Mom even tried to argue. "So long, Gerald. She's going to miss her little friends. It will be good for her." My father answered with that tone that didn't allow discussion. The same tone my grandfather used. "My father is already old. He wants to spend time with his granddaughter." That night I cried until I fell asleep. The next day, I went to the public library after school and looked for books about plants, herbs, home remedies. I wanted to understand what could be in that liquid that my grandfather forced me to drink. I found information about plants that caused dizziness, nausea, drowsiness. Could that be it? Was he drugging me for some reason? Time passed too quickly and soon December arrived. Dad drove me to Millfield, a long and silent journey. I watched through the window as the urban landscape of Boston was left behind, giving way to roads between plantations and small inland towns. When we arrived, Grandma Irene was waiting for us on the porch with her usual contained smile. Grandpa Arnold was in town taking care of business, which gave me a few hours of relief. "You've grown, girl," commented Grandma, hugging me. I felt that she was thinner, her body fragile against mine. There were more wrinkles on her face, and her hair was completely white now. My father didn't stay long. He left my suitcases, talked briefly with my grandmother, and returned to Boston, promising to come back in March to pick me up. When his car disappeared down the dirt road, I felt as if my last link to safety had departed. That first night, the ritual repeated itself as always. The glass with the wettish liquid, the bitter taste, the feeling of numbness that came afterward. I managed to drink it all without vomiting. Perhaps because my body was already more accustomed to it, perhaps because I knew I needed to gain my grandfather's trust to be able to execute my plan. "See, it wasn't so difficult," he said with that strange smile that never reached his eyes. "You're already a young lady now. You need to learn to accept what's good for you." The following days established a routine. During the day, I helped Grandma Irene with the house and yard chores. Sometimes we visited the small town fair where she bought supplies and talked with other ladies. On these occasions, Grandpa Arnold was the image of the perfect grandfather, affectionate, attentive, placing his hand on my shoulder with pride as he introduced me to acquaintances. "My granddaughter from the city," he would say, and everyone smiled, admiring the good relationship between the respected local patriarch and his little granddaughter from the big city. No one imagined what happened when we were alone, When night fell and the doors closed, no one saw when he locked the kitchen door and took the brown bottle from the cabinet. No one heard when he called me weak and ungrateful if I hesitated before drinking. At night after taking the medicine, I felt a heavy drowsiness different from natural sleep. My limbs became numb and sometimes I had memory lapses, waking up the next morning without remembering how I had gone to bed. On those days, I felt strange pains throughout my body, as if I had been carried and placed in bed carelessly. One afternoon, while Grandpa Arnold had gone out to town, I found the courage to ask my grandmother about the medicine again. "Grandma, what's really in that medicine that Grandpa gives me?" We were in the garden picking tomatoes for lunch. She stopped what she was doing, looked around as if afraid the plants themselves might hear, and whispered, "They're herbs that he collects in the woods. He mixes them with other things. He never told me the complete recipe, but why do I have to take it? I don't feel sick." She hesitated, her wrinkled hands gripping the wicker basket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "He says it's a tradition in his family. His father gave it to him, who gave it to his children, and now to his grandchildren," I completed. "But why doesn't Aunt Leonora ever come to visit? It's because of this, isn't it?" Grandma Irene let a tear escape, which she quickly dried with her sleeve. "Your aunt, she never set foot here again after she got married. She says she still has nightmares to this day. It was the confirmation I needed. Whatever was happening wasn't normal, wasn't healthy, wasn't for my own good. It was something obscure that passed from generation to generation, a cycle that needed to be broken." That same afternoon, when Grandma Irene went to rest a bit, I took the opportunity to search the pantry. I found the bottle of laxative hidden behind the flour jars, exactly where I had seen it the last time. It was a strong medicine that she occasionally used for her chronic intestinal problems, as she said. I carefully read the label, "Fast-acting. Results in 15 to 20 minutes. Perfect." I hid the bottle in the pocket of my dress, my heart beating so hard that I thought it could be heard throughout the house. The following days were of careful observation and planning. I realized that my grandfather had a rigorous routine. On the third Sunday of each month, he organized a big lunch for the family. Uncles, aunts, cousins, everyone came to pay respect to the patriarch. It was a tradition he maintained religiously, a demonstration of his status in the community. The next family lunch would be in 2 weeks. The house was already preparing. Grandma Irene cleaned the best plates, separated the embroidered tablecloths, planned the elaborate menu that always included the roast pork that my grandfather was so proud to serve. It was during these preparations that I heard for the first time my grandfather talk about me to other people, as if I weren't present. "The girl is becoming a young lady," he commented to Uncle Jack, his younger brother, who had come to help with the preparations for the party. "Soon she'll be ready." "Ready for what, Dad?" asked my uncle, who seemed genuinely confused. Grandpa Arnold gave a strange smile. "To follow the family tradition, of course, like your Clarice followed." I saw my uncle's face turn pale. Clarice was my cousin, his daughter, a few years older than me. She rarely appeared at family lunches, always making excuses. At that moment, I understood that the circle was larger than I imagined. It wasn't just me, my father, my Aunt Leonora. It was something that affected all the girls in the family in one way or another. A dark secret kept for generations, protected by silence and fear. At night, lying in bed, I planned every detail. The family lunch would be the perfect setting. Everyone would be there. Everyone would see the mask of the respected patriarch would fall once and for all. On the morning of the big Sunday, I woke up before dawn, my stomach turning with anxiety and determination. I helped Grandma Irene prepare the house, set the table, put out the best china. She noticed my nervousness, but attributed it to the excitement of the family gathering. "Your cousins are coming today," she commented, trying to cheer me up. "It will be good to have children for you to play with." I nodded, feigning enthusiasm, while in the pocket of my dress was the bottle of laxative weighing like lead. Gradually, the relatives began to arrive. Uncles, aunts, cousins I barely knew, all brought gifts for Grandpa Arnold. Bottles of whiskey, cigars, homemade products. All greeted him with reverence as if he were a figure of unquestionable authority. He was in his element, sitting on the porch like a king receiving his subjects. He wore his best shirt, his gray hair neatly combed back, his mustache trimmed. From time to time he called me over, placed his hand on my shoulder, and introduced me as my little granddaughter from the city, smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. Each time he touched my shoulder, I felt a shiver of repulsion. Each fake smile, each public demonstration of grandfather-granddaughter affection, gave me more certainty that I was doing the right thing. Finally, it was time for lunch. The large dining room table was set with the embroidered tablecloth, the best china, the silver cutlery that only came out on special occasions. The roast pork was the centerpiece, surrounded by dishes of rice, beans, stuffing, and colorful salads. Grandpa Arnold, as always, sat at the head of the table. To his right, the place of honor was reserved for Uncle Jack, the oldest brother after him. The men of the family occupied the positions closest to the patriarch, while the women and children were at the ends of the table. As always, Grandpa was the first to serve himself. Then, according to the family hierarchy, the others could get their plates. It was an almost religious ritual that no one dared question. The moment was approaching. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone at the table could hear it. Martha called Grandpa Arnold, "Bring the juice pitcher to the table." It was the sign I had been waiting for. In the kitchen, I took the pitcher of orange juice that Grandma Irene had prepared. Next to it, Grandpa's special glass, the one only he could use, the same one he used to give me the medicine every night. With trembling hands, I placed the glass on the table next to his plate. I went back to the kitchen where the juice pitcher was waiting. I looked around, making sure I was alone. Quickly, I took the bottle of laxative from my pocket and poured a generous amount into the glass, much more than the recommended dose. I mixed it well with a spoon, watching the clear liquid dissolve in the orange juice. There was no visible change in color or texture. Perfect. I returned to the dining room with the pitcher in the glass, trying to control the tremor in my hands. I placed the glass in front of Grandpa Arnold and filled it to the brim with the special juice. "Thank you, little granddaughter," he said with that fake smile and drank half the contents in one gulp. I served the other guests and sat in my place at the end of the table next to Grandma Irene. My stomach was in knots. I couldn't eat anything, just moved the food around on the plate while I watched the clock on the wall. 15 to 20 minutes, the label said. The adults were chatting animatedly about politics, about the harvest, about prices in town. Grandpa Arnold, as always, dominated the conversation, telling stories of his youth, of how he had built everything from scratch, of how he deserved everyone's respect. At 17 minutes, I counted every second. I noticed the first change. He stopped in the middle of a sentence, a strange expression crossing his face. He ran his hand over his stomach discreetly and continued talking, but his voice no longer had the same firmness. 2 minutes later, he moved uncomfortably in his chair. Drops of sweat began to appear on his forehead, despite the day not being particularly hot. He drank the rest of the juice, probably thinking thirst was the problem. I silently filled his glass again. It was when he was in the middle of a story about how he had single-handedly faced a wild bull that the laxative showed its full strength. His face suddenly turned pale, then red like a ripe tomato. He stopped speaking abruptly, an expression of panic replacing the usual arrogance. "Excuse me," he mumbled, getting up with difficulty. But it was too late. A guttural sound escaped him, followed by something I'll never forget. The great patriarch, the man feared and respected by all, lost control of his bowels right there in front of the entire gathered family. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone froze in their places, cutlery suspended in the air, wide eyes fixed on the once imposing figure now reduced to an old man in a humiliating situation. "You demon!" he shouted, pointing directly at me while trying to contain the disaster spreading through his pants. "It was you." I'm sure it was you, but no one understood the accusation. How could an 11-year-old girl cause such a situation? For all present, it was just an old man having an embarrassing accident, blaming the first person he saw for the humiliation. "Dad, come on. You need to clean up," said Uncle Jack, trying to help him leave the room. "She poisoned me," Grandpa Arnold continued shouting, his face contorted with rage and shame. "Just like her mother vipers, all of them." His words caused even more embarrassment among the guests. Many began to get up, murmuring apologies, saying that perhaps it would be better to come back another day. Grandma Irene, beside me, remained silent, but when I looked at her, I saw something I had never seen before. A small smile at the corner of her lips and a different gleam in her eyes. She knew, she understood, and somehow she approved. It was the last time I saw my Grandpa Arnold. That same night, while he was still bedridden, humiliated, and furious, Uncle Jack took me back to Boston. "Your grandfather isn't well," was the official explanation. "Better for you to return to your parents until he recovers." In fact, everyone knew that something had been irreparably broken at that Sunday lunch. The image of the infallible patriarch had been destroyed, and with it his power over us. The chaos that followed in that dining room marked my life forever. As the guests rose embarrassed, murmuring apologies and avoiding looking directly at my grandfather, he continued to point at me and shout accusations. This girl put something in my drink, vociferated Grandpa Arnold, trying to compose himself while the unpleasant smell spread through the room. Come here, you cowards. Don't you see what she did to me? Uncle Jack tried to calm him, holding his arm, but Grandpa pushed him away forcefully. Let me go. This devil needs to be punished. He advanced toward me, bloodshot eyes, face red with fury and shame. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. I had never seen him so uncontrolled, so exposed. The mask of the respected patriarch had completely fallen, revealing the monster that only I knew. Grandma Irene, to everyone's astonishment, placed herself between us. That fragile woman who always lowered her head and accepted everything in silence rose like a wall. Enough, Arnold. Her voice, normally so soft, sounded firm for the first time. Not in front of everyone. What you've done to this girl on your nights is enough. The silence that fell over the room was like a heavy mantle. Her words, laden with meaning, made all the adults exchange confused and disturbed looks. What is she talking about, Dad? Asked Aunt Maggie, Grandpa Arnold's only daughter, who still maintained regular contact with him. It's nothing, he tried to dismiss, but his authority was in tatters as much as his pants. This old woman is senile. She doesn't know what she's saying. I know very well what I'm saying, continued Grandma Irene with a strength I had never seen in her. I know about the medicines you give the girl every night. I know about the basement where you lock her up. I know because I saw the same happen to Leonora years ago. Uncle Jack stepped forward, his expression hardening. Is this true, Dad? The same medicines you gave to my Clarice. The same ones you gave to all of us when we were children. The air in the room became so dense it seemed difficult to breathe. Aunt Maggie covered her mouth with her hands, tears springing to her eyes. That's why Leonora never came back. That's why Clarice always makes excuses not to come. Grandpa Arnold, cornered, did what all tyrants do when exposed. He attacked with more force. You don't understand, he shouted, hitting the table with such violence that the plates jumped. It's a tradition. It's to strengthen the family's blood. My father did this. His father did this. Who are you to question? It was at this moment that I found my voice, small, trembling, but clear enough to be heard by all. It's not medicine at all, I said, stepping forward. It's something bad that makes us dizzy, that erases parts of our memory. And afterward, in the dark basement, I couldn't finish. Grandpa Arnold charged at me like a bull, knocking over chairs in his path. His face was unrecognizable, contorted with hatred. Shut your mouth, you liar. I'll teach you to respect your elders. What happened next was like a blur. Uncle Jack and other men in the family held him back before he could reach me. There were screams, crying, plates breaking on the floor. Grandma Irene pulled me away to the kitchen where she hugged me tightly. It's over, my little granddaughter, she whispered, tears wetting my hair. It's over, he won't hurt you anymore. We stayed like that for some time, listening to the tumult in the room next door. Uncle Jack entered the kitchen, his face pale, his eyes heavy. I'm going to take you to Boston right now, he said, picking up my small suitcase that was already packed in the room. Your grandmother is coming too. It's not safe to stay here. And Grandpa? I asked, still trembling. Uncle Jack exchanged a significant look with Grandma Irene. Some men of the family are going to stay with him tonight to talk. I understood what wasn't said. For the first time, the patriarch would face consequences. In the car on the way to Boston, Grandma Irene held my hand throughout the journey. At one point, when she thought I was sleeping, I heard her talking quietly with Uncle Jack. I always knew she confessed from the beginning with Leonora, then with the boys. I tried to stop it, but it wasn't your fault, Mom, replied Uncle Jack. His voice choked. He terrorized us all, but I should have done more, she insisted. I should have protected those children. I should have protected Martha. You tried today, he answered gently. And it was Martha who ended up saving us all. I pretended to continue sleeping, but those words lit a small light inside me. Perhaps somehow my act of rebellion had broken something bigger than I imagined. A cycle of abuse that crossed generations. When we arrived at my parents' house in Boston, it was already past midnight. I remember the confused expression on my mother's face when she opened the door and found not only the daughter who should have been in the countryside, but also her mother-in-law and brother-in-law. What happened? She asked, alarmed. We need to talk, Dorothy, said Uncle Jack, with a seriousness that made my mother turn pale. I was sent to my room, but I kept the door ajar, listening to fragments of the conversation in the living room. I heard my uncle tell about the lunch incident, about Grandpa Arnold's accusations, about Grandma Irene's revealing words, and Gerald asked my mother, referring to my father, did he know all this? There was a heavy silence before Grandma Irene's response. My son was also a victim, Dorothy. All were. Some forget, others bury the memories so deep that they can pretend it never happened. I heard my mother cry. Muffled sobs she tried to contain with her hands. Then her voice firm despite the tears. Martha never goes back to that house, never. That night, lying in my bed in Boston, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was relief. Yes, relief to be away from that place, to not have to drink the medicine anymore, to not feel the fear of the dark basement. But there was also a deep sadness for everything I had discovered, for all the victims who came before me, for the silence that allowed it to continue for so long. And there was guilt. Despite everything, despite the abuse, the humiliation, the terror, I felt guilty for what I had done. I had been raised to respect my elders, to never question authority. What I had done was unthinkable under the rules of the world in which I grew up. The next morning when I woke up, I heard raised voices in the living room. I immediately recognized my father's voice. He had arrived. "What do you mean you took my daughter in the middle of the night? Who gave that order?" I approached the half-open door silently, my heart racing. My mother answered, her voice calm but firm. "Your father tried to attack Martha in front of everyone, Gerald. Jack did what was right. My father would never do that. He adores this girl. Like he adored Lenora," intervened Uncle Jack. "Like he adored Clarice. Like he adored you when you were a child." A dense silence followed, full of meaning. "I don't know what you're talking about," my father finally responded, but his voice had lost its conviction. "The medicines, Gerald," said Grandma Irene, so low that I had to strain to hear. "The medicines he gave you every night, the dark basement when you resisted. You know what we're talking about?" I heard a dull thud, as if my father had let himself fall into a chair. Then a sound I had never heard before. My father crying. Deep, heart-rending sobs of a man facing memories he had buried for decades. "I thought it had been just with me," he said through tears. I thought with Martha it would be different, that he had changed." I retreated away from the door, unable to hear more. I sat on the bed, hugging my knees against my chest. So many things made sense now. My father's silence about his own childhood, his insistence that I visit my grandparents despite my obvious fear. It wasn't cruelty, it was denial, a victim who couldn't face his own trauma. That afternoon my father came to my room. His eyes were red, his face marked by tears. He sat on the edge of my bed, not knowing what to say. "Forgive me, daughter." He finally spoke, his voice almost unrecognizable. "I should have protected you." I didn't respond immediately. There was so much between us now. Pain, understanding, the weight of revealed secrets. "What will happen to Grandpa?" I finally asked. My father sighed deeply. "He won't live alone with your grandmother anymore." Uncle Jack and other men in the family had a long talk with him. "He's going to a clinic where doctors will take care of him. And Grandma Irene, she's going to stay with Aunt Maggie for now. Later we'll see." We nodded in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. There was still a long road ahead. Difficult conversations, perhaps therapy, certainly reconciliation. But at that moment, I felt that the worst had passed. The secret had been exposed to the light of day, and like cockroaches, monsters don't survive under the spotlight. 3 days later, Aunt Leonora appeared at our house. It was the first time I had seen her in person, although I knew her face from photographs. She was a tall woman with dark hair and deep eyes that carried a familiar shadow. She hugged me for a long time without saying anything, and I felt her tears wet my shoulder. "You did what none of us had the courage to do," she finally told me, holding my face between her hands. "You broke the cycle." That night, while the adults talked in the living room, I retreated to my room, emotionally exhausted. Lying in bed, looking at the familiar ceiling of my room in Boston, I cried as I had never cried before. They weren't just tears of sadness or fear, but also of relief, like a deep wound that is finally cleaned and can begin to heal. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of more voices in the living room. This time, I recognized my cousin Clarice's, who had never been to our house before. I approached the door quietly and saw her, a 17-year-old girl with the same haunted look that I saw in myself when I looked in the mirror. "Is she still sleeping?" I heard her ask. I wanted so much to meet the brave cousin everyone is talking about. I left the room then, still in my pajamas, hair disheveled. Clarice came to me, hesitant at first, then hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for making him stop." It was at that moment that I fully understood the impact of what I had done. It hadn't just been a personal revenge, a way to escape my own torment. It had been an act of collective liberation. The patriarch had fallen, and with him, decades of abuse and silence. In the weeks that followed, our family began a painful process of reconstruction. My father entered therapy, finally facing the traumas of his own childhood. Aunt Leonora, who lived in Portland, Maine, began to visit regularly. Slowly, family wounds hidden for so long under layers of silence and denial began to be exposed and treated. Grandpa Arnold was admitted to a psychiatric clinic in Burlington. Nobody talked much about it, but I heard the adults commenting that he was much worse than they imagined, delusional, talking to himself, accusing everyone of conspiracy against him. The great patriarch, feared and respected, had become just a confused and frightened old man, stripped of his power. Grandma Irene came to live with us in Boston for a time. On the nights when I woke up screaming, haunted by nightmares of the dark basement, it was she who came to my room, sat beside me, and stroked my hair until I went back to sleep. I was a coward for so long, she confessed to me one night. I saw it happen to so many and did nothing. It took a child to show the courage that no adult had. You were a victim, too, Grandma, I replied, understanding for the first time how much she had also suffered at the hands of that man. She nodded, silent tears running down her wrinkled face. Yes, but that doesn't absolve me. I should have protected you, the children. It was a conversation that marked the beginning of my true understanding of the cycle of abuse, how victims can become accomplices, how fear can paralyze, how silence can perpetuate suffering through generations. At school, Ms. Lucille noticed the change in me. Not only was I more focused on my studies, but there was a new confidence in my eyes despite the dark circles that revealed nights of poor sleep. Something changed, Martha, she asked discreetly after a class. I hesitated, uncertain about how much I could reveal. I solved a very big problem, teacher. Something that had scared me for a long time. She smiled as if she understood much more than my words said. You know, sometimes the bravest people are those who face their fears when no one is watching. I'm proud of you, whatever you did. That conversation stayed in my heart amidst so much chaos and pain. It was a reminder that I had done the right thing, even if by unconventional methods. In March, almost 2 months after the incident, I received a letter. The envelope had the Burlington postmark, and inside was a single sheet of paper with few words written in a shaky handwriting. You destroyed everything. You ended the family tradition. One day you'll understand the mistake you made. There was no signature, but I knew who the sender was. I showed the letter to my parents, who immediately called the clinic. Apparently, Grandpa Arnold had managed to send the letter during a supervised visit from Aunt Maggie. The letter should have scared me, but instead I felt a strange sense of closure. He still didn't understand, perhaps he never would. But he no longer had power over me. His threats were just empty words from a broken man. What do you want to do with this? Asked my father, holding the letter as if it were something toxic. I thought for a moment, then took a match from the kitchen. In the backyard, under the approving gaze of my parents, I burned that last vestige of the power my grandfather tried to exert over me. As the ashes scattered in the wind, I felt something inside me heal. Not completely. Some wounds are too deep to heal at once, but enough to start looking forward without the past being a crushing weight. I will never again allow someone to make me feel small. I promised myself at that moment. I will never again remain silent in the face of evil, even if it comes disguised as tradition or respect. It was on that day at 11 years old that I understood that my life had taken a completely different course. The cycle of abuse that crossed generations in my family had been broken. Not by a powerful adult, not by an external intervention, but by a girl who decided that enough was enough. And so, with the ashes of a threatening letter in my hands and a new determination in my heart, I took my first true step toward healing. The path would be long, with ups and downs, with tears and nightmares, but it would never again be trodden in the darkness of silence. Today, at my 75 years of age, I look out the window of my apartment in Boston and see a city that has grown with me. Just like this metropolis, I too have transformed over the decades. The wrinkles on my face are like the streets of this city. They tell stories of paths traveled, challenges overcome, life intensely lived. My dear viewers, reaching 75 years after all I experienced in Millfield is a victory I celebrate every day as I tend to my orchids. Each flower that blooms reminds me of that 11-year-old girl who used a bottle of laxative to end years of terror. That Sunday at the dining table changed everything. A simple bottle hidden in the pocket of my dress made my grandfather Arnold's mask fall. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or authorities. It comes from the small hands of a desperate child who can't take it anymore. What I've learned that the most dangerous monsters aren't from children's stories, but those who hide behind family respect and tradition. My grandfather wasn't just a cruel man, he was the guardian of a cycle of abuse that crossed generations. The laxative in his glass wasn't just my liberation, It was the salvation of my Aunt Leonora, Cousin Clarice, my own father, and so many others. Today, when I gather my children and grandchildren on Sundays in this same Boston apartment, I look at them and think, you never needed a nighttime medicine. You never knew the terror of the dark basement. I broke the chain that could have reached you. The New Cycles nonprofit that I founded with my dear Henry has already helped hundreds of children find their own liberation, each in their own way. Who would have thought that from that moment of desperation in my grandparents' kitchen would be born a project that would save so many lives? My dear viewers who have stayed with me until the end, if my story touched your heart, remember to like this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The girl who once trembled with fear in the dark basement is the same woman who today tends her vertical garden and smiles through the window at the city that welcomed her. Do it now. Share so that other Marthas trapped in their own emotional basement know that there is always a path to the light, even when everything seems too dark.